I want to introduce to you Gluware Lab. And when I describe Gluware Lab, I like to talk about when you're using Gluware, the product, and most people start using our platform and our apps, which again, device manager, config, drift, and audit, you kind of see it in this right-hand pane. Most people come in and are using the apps. And the analogy is like to a gaming console. You plug in a game and you play the game. But sometimes you'd like to maybe change the game or add a level to the game or add a character to the game, right? There's always a need that comes up around customization. And sometimes it's perceived in something like Gluware is like it's a closed system because all I have is the apps that have been delivered. But actually, once you take a look at Gluware Lab, you actually kind of peel the cover back and see that it's actually a very open platform. And with just some JSON and JavaScript skill set, you can really add any customization you like into the product. So that kind of sets the stage of like, how do I build the video game or how do I augment the video game in this analogy? And that would be done through Gluware Lab, our IDE. So again, Gluware Control is delivered as a platform. You could have an instance running in your lab and you could have instances running in production. Those instances are connected to a distribution center, essentially a place where software packages can be published and then consumed. And the way where those software is built is in Gluware Lab. So Gluware Lab is a rich IDE. It's built on the Eclipse framework, which a lot of developers would know what Eclipse is. But basically built on that Eclipse framework is Gluware Lab that has been customized for Gluware. You have Gluware plugins, you have open source plugins, and you have the native Eclipse plugins. And you essentially have an all-in-one environment to build and develop network features and data models. And Alex is going to be showing an example of that in demo. You can build and design workflows, and another component that Olivia will be showing, which is around custom scripts. But essentially custom scripts and workflows for us fall into the same category. One, you're working through kind of, in a workflow, you're kind of doing a wizard-based step 1, step 2, step 3, complete the workflow. In a script, it's more like maybe a single purpose utility, but you're then wrapping something around it like a schedule. And then in the third category of what you're commonly doing with Gluware Lab is doing the API integrations. So in each of these, you're leveraging the pieces you see on the bottom here, which is we have a full feature library. If you've ever looked at Eclipse is like a framework and you publish content into it. So Gluware has a feature library. We have our own development kit. We have our own REST kit. I talked about the REST development kit, which allows you to onboard API calls extremely rapidly. So in Lab, you do some work in JSON and JavaScript. You build the features you're looking to use in Lab. You can fully test and integrate. So we have the full orchestration engine that we run in Gluware. We have that in the all-in-one in Lab. It has our integrated databases of SQL and MongoDB, and essentially is an all-in-one Gluware package that enables that kind of DevOps-like mentality of, I want to quickly develop, test, publish to maybe a production test or a prod test or something. And then if I'm happy with that, I actually push it to full production. But through Gluware Lab, you're able to then package and publish these components into your distribution center or distribution area. And then in Gluware Control, you load in those packages and you're off and running. So the only thing I would kind of caveat to say is that, each organization operates differently. Some want to just consume the applications that deliver the functionality, and we'll wait for Gluware to kind of add features and expand our product line. Some need new features and customization, but they don't want to do it themselves. So they engage with Gluware, or we often engage a partner of ours that does the work and the customization. Or you fall into the third category, which is really what the target of this presentation, where your organization has some, folks that are fairly programming savvy, that are not afraid of some code or some scripting, some JavaScript, and can take this on, and they would like to become really kind of true black belts, if you will, in Gluware to develop in Gluware Lab and publish into Gluware Control. So with that, let's move on to the demonstrations, and you'll see everything I've been talking about.
So today, the data model that we're going to be modifying is going to be a VLAN database. So in this case, I have a data model that I can create as many instances as I would like. And today I have no fields or no data that I can provide in these instances. I can have as many instances as I want, but no data is provided. So I'm going to show you how we can quickly create and add fields so that we can, add load data into these fields. Whether it's, this data could be added through the Gluware UI itself or from an API call. So in our Gluware Lab, which is the IDE that we use to develop and run and test everything related with Gluware, right? So we can run Gluware completely headless. We test everything in here before we can send it to Gluware. So, and creating a data model is fairly simple. And you have 3 screens here. And within these 3 panels, the first panel is how I create the form. The middle one is displays that form. And the third one is the result after I fill in the data into that form. So an example that it could be here is if I want to create the field ID, and it's just going to be a simple text field, and I can fill in this data, and then I can create an instance, an iteration of this data that allows me to save different variations of it, right? And as many variations as possible. Yeah, so today we're going to create this VLAN database list here. So as you can see, right, I started by creating this field inside of it, and allows me to create many iterations of it. But then I created an array, and I wrapped that one property inside of it. But I also want to be able to give it a name for the VLAN that I'm going to be creating. So we have different ways of beautifying this, adding a title. For example, I could come here and say VLAN display.label. And I can specify whatever label I want. In this case, I'm just going to go with VLAN database. So as you can see, I can quickly develop this list, and I can fit in my data with however I want, including having the ability to have built-in validation so that I can make sure that only numbers within a specific range are allowed here, or only strings with no numbers, etc. Whatever I want, I can have built-in validation as well. So in the sake for speeding up, I'm just going to go ahead, speeding up this process, I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste the form that I have created for this, that I would like to have for this. And I'll go ahead and I'll do beautify it and clean up this JSON. So this allows me to have, I can specify as many instances as I want in this order. And I'm creating, a different type of a table here, so that's easier for visualization. And I'm also creating so that only specific patterns or numbers are allowed in these fields. An example here for an ID number, that I can now specify something like in control. If I were to save it like this would be an error and would not allow me to save because it's outside of the range, right? And same thing is I only allowed to type whatever information I want here. So I'm happy with this form. I now want to send this to Gluware. So I'll go, or Gluware control. So I'm going to save this instance, this form. I don't need to save different iterations of it. But in this case, I do want to create one, and I'll just add a VLAN 10 and data. Let me go ahead and hit save. So what I've done here is create an iteration of it. So I've now saved one iteration of that file, and it looks like I have one more item here that I need to create, so that it stops complaining. So now you see the validation errors are all gone. So now I want to send this information to Gluware. And the way that I do that is I want to send it to that system that I was working on. So I want to publish this package, and I want to say, version 2, I would like to say, adding new fields for VLAN database. So as I push this to the system, I go into my Gluware control system, and this is somewhere that I did not have those fields available before. Now I can go into the solutions management, and I want to install that newly updated package. so that I have new fields to install. So in this case, it's going to be a package. Oops. And again, this is the release notes that I just made. And I want to go ahead and install that. So now as I come back to the model editor, I now have that form that we talked about that I just created. And again, this is that instance that I sent and created and sent to Gluware, right? So now we're going to show how can we make a call to Gluware, an API call to Gluware to either create these types of instances or update these instances with the appropriate data. And then I'll be able to provision a device with this data or this information. So first, I'm just going to use an open source API client. This is Advanced REST client. And I'm going to go ahead and remove this other instances that I don't need so that we can visualize the one that I'm going to be creating. So I'm going to minimize this a bit here. So for this specific one, I want to create an instance and I want it to be called VLAN DB list 3. And I have some data provided in there that's going to match the data that we have. And I'm providing the organization that I want to send this information into. So by then I would have retrieved this information from Gluware for making other API calls. And that's how I have this. And in this case, I want to go ahead and hit send. So now all of this data, that instance was created with the data that was provided. So I can go inside of that instance and visualize this information. I can, move this thing around depending on wherever I need to do, delete or add new ones. Okay, so yeah, now we just got done through running and creating a new instance from an API call. And I'm going to show you is I now want to be able to update an existing instance with new values. And then from an API call, I want to provision these new values to a device. So in this specific case, I have 2 VLANs there already. And for my API call that I want to make, I want to provide a new list of values. So I'm specifying the type of action, which is going to be update. And I want to update a specific instance name, which is going to be VLAN DB list 1, which is matches the name that I have there. And I should replace this list, the existing list, with a new list of VLANs. So as I hit send and that call is complete, I should be able to refresh this and see that the new list is now provided in here. And equally, it is provided in here as well. And it should match the same list that I sent. Okay, so now that we've just updated the VLAN list 1 with those new values from the API call, now I want to be able to provision these VLANs on the device. Now, in this case here, we've already done some work that this object is already assigned as part of this device that we're working with, or this node that we're working with. And I want to demonstrate and how we can make this API call. Of course, I could do it through Gluware, but I want you to be able to show that this is also can be accomplished from an API call. So in this specific case here, I'm going to use my client there, and I have my types of actions, and this is going to be a preview, and the preview type is going to be changed, and I'm specifying the device ID. Of course, I've previously retrieved this information from a separate API call. So I want to go ahead and send that to Gluware. So now you see that job has initiated. So we can, of course, go into this job and you can see the changes that Gluware is going to make, right? And the power and the idempotency capabilities, which allows you to provision your device as many times as possible, but yet you still have the ability to have Gluware end up with the exact same result, regardless of the existing configuration changes. And what do we mean by that is that the list that I'm providing here should be the list that is at the end of it. And whatever is on the device, Gluware is going to be able to compare and understand that this VLAN, right, is not on my list, therefore it needs to be removed. Similarly, the VLAN names, whatever is on my list and it is not on the running configuration, Gluware understands that the name that is on the running configuration does not match what it should be there, and he understands how to go in and clean that up as well. So if I wanted to provision that, right? Could be similarly with a separate call, which is going to be to provision to the same node ID. I could issue that different types of action instead of a preview. Now it's a provision. And as we return to summary, as you can see, we have a new provisioning and the icon has changed. So if I'm happy with whatever came up in my preview, now I have the chance to go out and put that configuration on this device and clean up the configuration with whatever it should be. And you can see Gluware making the changes. And then it will save the configuration at the end. And again, this is what has been the commands that were processed. And this will finalize the demo of creating a data structure, sending it to Gluware, and making API calls in order to provision to a device. Thank you for your time.
So what I have here, I'm going to show you an example of customers asking us to help them with tracking down switch port that are not used, that are not shut down, and potentially could be a security risk. So I have this switch here that I can show you. And on this switch here, I'm going to show you that amongst all these different switch ports that I have here, I have potentially 1, 2, 3, 4 switch ports that potentially could be, there could be no good reasons for them to stay in that state, right? So I'm going to show you how we are tracking those ports. And there's this particular tracker that we have here, which allow us to literally track on any device, any switch here, that over a period of time that you can define here, weeks, days, hours, etc. So just for the sake of this demo, of course, I'm just putting seconds here. How you can track all these different switch ports, and if they haven't produced any activity during these during those here 5 seconds, I will trigger an action to shut them down and or enforce a default configuration change on those switch ports. The thing that I would like to do is I don't want this tracker to just execute that change when it can find some potential candidate switch port that might need to be shut down. So here I'm asking to integrate with this particular instance of ServiceNow. This is my instance that I'm going to show in a second. And that this tracker will have a tight integration with a change request issued by Gluware on this particular instance of ServiceNow. And it's going to listen up how those change requests are going from pending to approved, and will only perform the change when approved. So I haven't started tracking on these ports yet, so I'm going to run this particular tracker on this node here. So what I'm doing here, I am going to trigger this custom script, and notes that this is just for the demo purposes, that I am running this manually. But what you can do is that you can put this around the clock. So you have something that can run every hour, for instance. And you would want to do this on the tracker because the reason is you want to set this up and forget it and have Gluware monitoring those ports and only interact with you through change request in ServiceNow. So let me run this script. And I'm going to just do this, once here. And this is going to start tracking those ports. So nothing's going to happen in ServiceNow. So while it's doing this, and I'm putting the log window here so that you can see what the engine is doing, I'm going to show you my ServiceNow instance that right now is, a traditional ServiceNow instance. There's nothing special here other than the default, some default, changes right now on this particular view here. And you can see that, the engine is literally going through looking at switch ports that potentially have been inactive over the period that you have defined in the tracker. And you can see that you have these 4 ports that I highlighted earlier here, which are potentially, not producing anything, right? 5, 7, 9, and 21. So there's no existing tracking found right now, because that's the first time I'm running this tracker. And so nothing happens, and nothing is created in ServiceNow for now. I mean, the monitoring starts, and now the tracker will look at the inactivity of these ports. And as soon as these ports inactivity period is greater than the one that you have defined in the policy, then it will literally start, producing some change request here. So let's run this script again. And you're going to see that in ServiceNow now, because it has increased the time that I would tolerate this with those switch ports these switch ports to be inactive, I should see now change request coming my way on ServiceNow. So let's look at that together. And you can see that tracking inactive switch port, right? Remember, we found 5, 7, 9, and 21. And you can find that, tracking started in that, around that time. And then you have those candidate switch ports 5, 7, 9, and 21. And then we're literally engaging with ServiceNow now. And it created 1, 2, 3, 4 change requests. So let's look at that. Oops. And you can see I have those 4 change requests here. Okay. And let's interact with this particular change request. And you can see that Gluware has, created this change request under the category network and says the change request is about changing the switch ports, from down to admin down because it's literally in not connect for too long. Okay. And so this script, remember, this tracker would run around the clock, and nothing happens until those change requests are in the approved state. So let's do that. Okay, I'm going to literally go through the process of approving. The change management is going to be assessed. So the ticket moved to assessed. And I've got that person that literally going to approve that this is a change that makes sense. Then it goes through the board approval for a change. Going to approve that. And from a scheduling standpoint, I'm going to define a change window here where I would allow Gluware to perform that change. And now I'm going to go and I'm going to run implement. As soon as this ticket is going implement, and again, just because of for this demo, I'm running this manually, but it would happen automatically when this tracker is automatically attached to a node and to run every 10 minutes or something. So you can look at this particular state. Not the entire UI of ServiceNow is dynamic, but this particular checkbox is. So you're going to see that this particular ticket is going to move from implement to review as the changes have been performed. You can see it wants to review automatically. And when I'm looking at what happened, you can see that port 5, obviously, so let me move this thing slowly. You can see that the change request for candidate switch port 5 has been approved. It's in the implement state, and this is why now it's literally defaulting the config and disabling the port as requested, in my policy. And the 3 other ports do not change, because they're still in the pending state. It's not been approved yet, right? And so now I can go and close this ticket, say it was successful, blah, blah, blah. And I'm updating this ticket. Oh, I'm sorry, this is not what I wanted to do. I wanted to close it instead, close this ticket. So now it's closed. And when this script will run again, then the tracking will stop, and because this port now is not in the not connect state anymore, right? It's been admin shut. You're going to see that the tracking stops. So the idea is that you can put this tracker around the clock to be able to track all your switch ports and interact with Gluware through the change request in ServiceNow. So now, how am I doing this integration? So just to show you that this is, that tracking is stopped because the tickets, the change request here, has been closed, right? So how have I done this integration? So we've shown you Gluware Lab before, and this is, for instance, how I'm showing how we integrate an API. These are the changes that I needed in order to interact with ServiceNow. I only needed, amongst all the available calls, the hundreds of calls available in the API, these were the only calls that I needed in order to interact with it. So it's literally one line, one call. And so just to give you an example of interaction here, I'm going to use 2 calls here, and you can see it's one line, one call. And I've just got a simple script to show you that this interaction can be done with that few little of scripting lines here, which is literally I'm creating a normal change request, getting the sysid. This is what ServiceNow is asking to use to interact with any object through their API, and I'm going to update it to just literally produce this short description and description for this change request. So just to show you, back here, there is nothing called onug in the change request. I'm running this particular script here. And once this is done, you can see if I refresh the page now, you can see I have now this change request onug that appeared, which obviously includes my onug. So this concludes what I wanted to show you and how quickly we can integrate with third-party APIs in Gluware.